They don't say his name anymore in Alumo, not out loud. The old ones just shake their heads when you ask. The young ones pretend they don't know. And the children, they've learned not to point when he walks by because he still does walk by every morning, same path, same steps, slow, like the ground owes him something and he's come to collect one foot at a time. His skin is dry like bark, his eyes the color of rusted iron. No one has ever seen him eat or sleep or speak, but they remember. They remember that he should have died 70 years ago. Long ago, before the cell towers rose over the hills and before the tar roads cut through the red soil, Alumo was a place of dust, goats, and secrets. And in that time, there lived a man named Tunji, a herbalist, they said, a healer, some called him, a devil, others whispered. He wore silence like a second skin and walked with a sack of herbs, bones, and truths no one else wanted to touch. He was good with sickness, better with the kind that crawled under the skin. Grief, guilt, broken love. But Tunji never asked for payment in coins, only memories. Small ones at first, the sound of your mother's voice, the smell of your first rain, the taste of mango when you were 10, gone in exchange for healing. People paid. People always pay when pain speaks louder than memory. Then there was a woman whose child had fever that boiled from within. Tunji came when called but said nothing, only stared at the woman. A long stare, a knowing one. She begged, he agreed, but the price was steep. Her tongue, she offered it. That night, the child lived. The next morning, the woman could only weep in silence, but she smiled because her son was breathing. Tunji left without a word. He always did. The villagers began to fear him after that. Not hate, fear. Fear is quieter. It eats slowly. They started to bury their dead faster, kept their doors shut at dusk. Mothers warned their children, if you hear footsteps after dark, don't look outside. And if you do, don't speak his name. The priest of the time did not like him, but Tunji had done nothing. His only crime was being different, being powerful, being alive. But then one day Tunji himself grew sick. And the village watched him cough into leaves, tremble in the market, lean against the shrine stone with blood in his spit. Finally, death came. They say he died with no one at his side. They say they buried him normally, like all the others, but it was a lie. They buried him upright, facing the hill of ancestors, and recited the ritual backwards unfinished. An abomination. They say the earth swallowed him whole, and then he came back. Their refusal to finish the ritual and refusal to ever speak of him again trapped him in the living world. It was a girl who saw him first, 10 years later. She said there was a man watching her fetch water. Same face as the drawing in the shrine, same eyes, but older, much older. The villagers beat the girl for lying, but more saw him after that. Always at the edge, always quiet. His house, long abandoned, had fresh footprints outside. The clay door was swept clean. Inside, the bones of old herbs were rearranged. The walls had names scratched into them, names of the living, names of the dead, names that began to disappear from the memories of those who once knew them. And that's when it began, the forgetting. A boy forgets his father. A woman forgets her wedding day. A man forgets he even had a son. Photos blur. Graves go unvisited. Names vanish mid-prayer. And through it all, the man walks, never speaks, only watches. And when he passes, you feel it like a brush of cold ash across your chest, like something was just taken. Now, all these years later, a stranger comes.
Afi, 28, from the city, a teacher, sharp, modern, voice full of certainty and syllables. She comes to Alumo to start a new job, to mold young minds. But the village has forgotten its own. And when she finds the drawing of a man with rusted eyes carved into the schoolhouse wall, she's told, "We don't speak of him." And when she finds her name already written in the shrine's book of remembrance, she starts to wonder, why does the man with rusted eyes stand outside her classroom every morning? Why does he nod when she speaks? And why can't she remember her brother's face anymore? Afi didn't believe in curses. Not really. She believed in power cuts, outdated school books, and children who needed guidance. She believed in long days, longer bus rides, and the kind of fatigue that settles behind the eyes. But curses, no. Still, something about Alumo felt unfinished, like a story interrupted mid sentence. The village smiled too easily. The elders listened too closely. And the children? They drew strange things, crooked houses, red eyed shadows, and a man with no mouth, and always the same man. On her third night, Afi stayed late at the schoolhouse, marking scripts by lantern light. The power had gone again. It always did when the wind blew from the east. Outside, the crickets stopped, not faded, stopped. Afi noticed because silence has a weight. It presses. She looked up. Through the window, past the long grass and rusted fence, someone stood beneath the mango tree, still, watching, not moving. She froze, then blinked. He was gone. The next morning, she asked the children who lived near the tree. "Old man," they said, "walk slow. What's his name?" The boy who answered frowned harder, then looked at his hands like the name had slipped between his fingers. "We don't know," he said, "but he writes things." That day, Afi visited the shrine, a cracked clay structure crouched at the village's edge, facing the hill of ancestors. Inside, it smelled of dust and candle ash. She found the book of remembrance, thick, bound with bark, pages yellowed and calling. Every villager's name was in it. Births, deaths, marriages. She flipped to the back, stopped. There, on a fresh page, her own name. AFIA, Kojo, 28 arrived. No one else had written it. She hadn't told them her middle name. She hadn't told anyone. She checked again. Below her name was a space, a blank line. That night her dreams turned heavy. She was standing in a field of graves. All the headstones were smooth, no writing, but the voices around her called out names she couldn't remember. A man in the distance watched her. He held a chalk and a book. When she tried to run, the field tilted. Her feet sank into the soil like wet cloth. The sky folded inward. And just before waking, she heard the man whisper, without lips, "You asked to forget." So they did. In the following days, Afi searched. She spoke to the oldest woman in Alumo, Madame Nare. Madame Nare laughed when Afi mentioned Tunji. "Still walking is he," she said, stirring her millet porridge with a shaky hand. "What was he?" Afi asked. "Not what," Nare said. "When? He's not in this time. He's the debt that wasn't paid properly." "What does that mean?" But the old woman only shook her head. "You speak well, teacher, but some names are not for mouths anymore." Afi began to record her findings. She even left her phone on overnight, hoping to catch the footsteps she thought she heard outside her window at 2 a.m. One morning, she found the phone off, battery drained, but in her notebook a message was written. "Memory is a river, and I am the drought." It wasn't her handwriting. Things began to unravel. A child forgot her own name mid song. A man cried in the market because his daughter no longer knew who he was, even though she held his hand. Photographs lost their color. Chalk snapped at the blackboard before a name could be written. The village grew quiet. No one spoke of forgetting. That would make it real. And if it was real, it might find you next. Afi wrote her brother's name down again and again in the corner of every notebook she owned. But one day, she couldn't remember why she was doing it. She stared at the name like it belonged to someone else. Then came the day she followed him, the man. She saw him near the hill, walking slowly, as always. So she followed, through dry fields, past the river bed, into the old grove where no one farmed anymore. He didn't turn, didn't run, didn't hide. He just walked as if he'd been waiting for her to follow. He led her to an old termite-eaten house, crumbling at the edges, roof swallowed by vines. Inside, the walls were covered in names, hundreds, thousands, written in white chalk, red clay, and something darker. Some were scratched out, others smeared as if the memory had resisted being removed. In the center of the room, a wooden stool and a name carved into the floor. AFI A. Kojo. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, face dry as cracked leather, eyes the color of rusted metal, lips sealed shut by age or will, but in his hand was a chalk. He pointed it at her, then at the stool, then at the wall. She shook her head, backed away, but her legs didn't move. Her body felt heavy, cold, like her name was being called from under the floor. She ran, tripped, sprinted back to the village, breathless, wordless. The villagers looked at her strangely, some with sympathy, some with fear, most with nothing at all, like they'd never seen her before. And then she realized no one said her name, not even once. The next morning, Afi couldn't find her own reflection. She stood before the mirror in her small room above the schoolhouse. The glass was unbroken, clean, untouched. But where her face should have been, there was nothing. No eyes, no mouth, no movement, just the flicker of lantern light bouncing back emptiness. She touched her face. Still there, but the mirror told another story. And something deep inside her knew her forgetting had begun. She left the mirror covered with cloth and went to the school. But the children didn't greet her. They didn't see her. She stood before them, chalk in hand, her voice sharp and certain. Let's begin. But they stared past her like air. Only one child responded, a little girl, quiet, always drawing. She handed Afi a picture, a house on a hill, a dark figure with rusted eyes, and beside him, a woman with no face. Underneath, written in shaky block letters, he took your name. That evening, Afi went to Madame Nare again, but the old woman was gone. Not dead, just gone. The neighbors said she'd never lived there, that the house had been empty for years, and yet the door was still swinging, and the porridge bowl was still warm. Afi backed away. Everywhere she turned, the world was forgetting itself, folding inward like an old map, erased from the corners first. She clutched her notebook, flipping through the pages. Her brother's name, gone. Her own notes, smeared. The chalk marks she'd made on the schoolhouse wall, cleaned. The shrine, burned down in the night. And all the while, the villagers walked slower, spoke less, looked through her like mist. Then came the sound. It began at dusk, a low humming throb from beneath the ground, a drumbeat without rhythm, a heartbeat with no body. Afi followed it, back to the termite-eaten house, back to the room of names. But this time there was no door, just a tree, a tall, crooked baobab tree where the horse once stood, its trunk hollowed, split wide like a yawning mouth. The inside of the tree was blackened with soot, and carved deep into the bark was her name again, Afea Kojo, with a second line beneath it, forgotten. He stepped out from behind the tree, same as always, slow, still, watching. But this time, Afi didn't flinch. Why me? She asked. No answer. He couldn't speak, but he pointed. Behind the tree, where roots curled like fingers around buried bones, there was a mirror, an old one, cracked but whole, and in its reflection she saw her face again, only not hers, not fully. The nose was wrong, the eyes older, like she had aged 20 years in a blink. She stepped closer, and the face began to speak. You asked to forget, it said, and now you must remember. Suddenly it all came rushing back. Her brother, his accident, the pain, the crying, her voice begging into the dark. I'd give anything to forget. And something had heard her, something that feeds on memory, something that walked like a man but died a long time ago. Afi collapsed beside the tree. Tears came now, real, sharp, bitter, but memory came too, and with it a choice. There was chalk beside her, and the trunk was bare, save her name. She could write, not her own name, someone else's. Trade a memory for a piece of herself. Save herself by sacrificing another. That was the deal. That had always been the deal. That was Tunji's curse, or maybe his blessing, a forgotten man offering to unburden the grieving. One name at a time. Afi stood and dropped the chalk. No, she whispered. I remember now. I choose to remember. The tree groaned, the roots shivered, and the figure with rusted eyes stepped backward into the shadow of the bark, dissolving like dust into wind. In the morning, the fog lifted slowly. That for the first time in years, the sky cleared above the village. People began to remember things they didn't know they had forgotten. The names of their grandparents, the way to the riverbank shrine, the old stories with endings. When Afi chose to remember her brother's death, she breaks the village's unspoken rule, remembering the man no one dared speak of, the man whose story had been buried beneath fear, silence, and centuries of forgetting. Afi led them to the place where his body had been hidden. The elders, trembling now, older than they'd ever felt, completed the ritual they once feared to finish. They sang his name. They offered fire, salt, and soil. They asked for forgiveness, and they buried him properly. After that, the villagers spoke again. Names returned, faces were recognized. Children laughed, photos regained color, but the baobab tree remained. And Afi left her job that week. She never taught again, but she never forgot. She couldn't. That was the price. And deep in the old grove, under a tree the villagers carved, Afi Ekojo remembered.